So you want to take it away?
Yes. Welcome, everyone. So happy that you are with us. My name is Chris Smith, and part of my background, as you might know, is someone that has done some marriage and family counseling. I'm a meditation teacher, author, grandfather, and someone who hosts a chronic illness. So, Dave?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Hey, I didn't understand your email you sent earlier. Didn't you say something about taking a vow of silence during this podcast? Or did I misunderstand that you were
I
going to
think
have a
you
moment of
misread.
silence?
I
Oh,
think you
okay.
misread
Okay.
that, my friend.
That
Okay, we'll
feels
get to
like
that.
a bad idea for a host, but
Well, I don't know. You haven't been with Chris before, so yeah, my name's Dave Kopacz. I'm a psychiatrist, yoga instructor, meditation teacher, artist, author, cancer survivor, and a friend of Chris Smith. And we've got Jeremy David Engels on the show today, talking about his book on mindful democracy. So, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself there,
Sure, it'd be my
Jeremy? Yeah.
pleasure. First off, thanks for having me. This is such a treat to be here with both of you. And yeah, my name is Jeremy Ingles, and I'm the liberal arts professor of communication and ethics at Penn State. And I'm also a longtime yoga and meditation teacher. My wife and I co-own with another couple a little yoga studio in our town called Yoga Lab, and this year will be our 10-year anniversary, which is really exciting. And yeah, and I have written 6 books. This is my first trade book, so my first book that isn't, intended for other academics. And my scholarship is about democracy, about the history of democracy, and especially the power of words and language in democracy. And I'm really excited to be here with both of you today.
Thank you.
Should we ask the question, Chris?
This is a question that we are asking all persons who come on the show, and
Starting with you.
starting
Ooh,
with you.
all right.
Mhm. Yeah, so our podcast is called Becoming a True Human, and that comes from my work with Joseph Rael, Beautiful Painted Arrow, who's um, a member of the Southern Ute tribe and grew up in Pueblo cultures in the Southwest. And so we've been trying to figure out what exactly is a true human. So we thought we'd ask each guest, what's your definition of a true human?
Hmm. That's an interesting phrase, right? Becoming a true human. Is it a practice of becoming something that we are not yet? Or is it a practice of peeling away layers of illusion to get at the core of who we truly are? And maybe those two things are the same. I'm not sure. But I think from a Zen Buddhist perspective, which tends to be the perspective that's most influential for me, a true human being is a being that feels and feels deeply and often feels pain. A being that wants to be happy, that wants joy, um, and a being that is capable of transforming suffering into joy, especially if we learn how to work together with others. And I think that, um, you know, somebody made this illusion. It was John Dewey, actually, in The Public and Its Problems. He's one of my
Hmm.
big influences. He said that we never ask about the relationship between the letters in an alphabet. They're
Hmm.
just related. But we constantly ask about the relationship between individuals and society. And he said it's the same thing. Individuals are interrelated the way that letters in an alphabet are interrelated. And so I think that by nature, human beings are social. Um, and it's through building community
Yeah.
that we're able to transform suffering into joy.
It's great, great answer. And you write about true democracy. What's the relationship between a true human and true democracy?
Yeah, I wrestled a little bit with that phrase of true democracy. And I feel like it's necessary to demarcate what I want to talk about in the book from what we have right now. Um, And, human beings are remarkable creatures, right? I mean, we're so adaptable. We can get used to just about anything,
Yeah.
it seems like to me, and can come to accept really problematic situations as being normal. And I think that's what's happened with politics and democracy today is that we're so habituated to seeing democracy as a war between political parties for influence and um, that it becomes difficult for us to recognize that actually, at its essence, democracy is about people working together in order to address issues of common concern and to care for each other. That definition of democracy has been with us since the ancient Greeks. And so, I think that actually true democracy is one of the ways that we realize becoming true human beings.
Mm.
I like that
Beautiful.
interrelated and circular, and I love that John Dewey. I'd never heard that before about the relationship between the letters.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really great.
And some
Yeah,
of too what you're talking about is you use the word enemyship, and I think you even wrote a book about this. And I'm just wondering if you would be willing to just, I think you've started already, but to give a little bit of a definition for those who are listening in.
Sure. Yeah, so my very first book was called Enemyship, and my PhD's in rhetoric, and so rhetoric is one of the oldest liberal arts, especially in the West, but really in the world. And rhetoric is the study of the power of language and symbols to move us, to do things, to create, to destroy. And uh, I was really interested in my dissertation and then my first book at some of the rhetorics, some of the kinds of norms that come out of the founding period of the United States, which become really relevant today because we're celebrating our 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence this year. And the word enemyship, as far as I know, was invented by Thomas Paine in Common Sense in 1776. And he was talking about how the colonies, the 13 colonies, were related to each other not by being friends, but by having an enemy ship. So instead of friendship, enemyship. And an enemyship is a relationship of people in opposition to a shared enemy. And so in that very first book, I look at like, what does the rhetoric of enemyship look like and how does it work? And I identified three parts to enemyship. So kind of the first move, if you think of enemyship like a game, the first move is to name the enemy. And then to say that the enemy is horrible, awful, untrustworthy, not human, a monster, and if you look at the history of war rhetoric, I teach a class on war rhetoric. You see all of the different ways that we name enemies. The second move in the game of enemyship is to deny that communication is possible with the enemy. Because if we talk with people, we realize actually they're human beings. Anytime we talk with someone is an opportunity for connection. It's an opportunity to begin breaking those walls down. So enemyship has to deny that that is something that we should do. So shut communication down in whatever way that you can. And often that is done by calling the enemy evil or saying that they're untrustworthy. Because if they're untrustworthy, if they're liars, you can't listen to them. Like anything they say is going to be a lie, so you just shouldn't talk to them. If they're evil, there's no point in talking to evil, right? I mean, all you can really do is destroy evil. So that's the second move. You name an enemy, deny communication, and then you escalate the crisis is the third move. It's a big crisis, it's a conflict, and it demands unified action in opposition to an enemy. That's often done through rhetorics of anger or fear, which are so characteristic of our politics today. And so you see enemyship in war rhetoric often, but I think that like that is the word I would use to characterize a lot of the political discourse in our country on both left and right,
Yes.
actually. Um, and so I think that we've become habituated to enemyship just by living in this world. I think it's like second nature. And so recognizing that tendency that we have, sitting with that tendency, not judging ourselves, but being able to identify it and pause and then not participate in it is really essential to rebuilding this culture of true democracy. I think it's probably also essential to recognizing and realizing being a true human being. That was a mouthful. Sorry.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
feel like you've given, Dave, do you have something?
I do. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Let me follow that up
please.
here with there's a great quote that comes out of psychoanalytic literature on fetishes, and it says that to dehumanize another requires that you first dehumanize yourself.
Mm,
And I think about this a lot with dehumanization, rehumanization, maybe this idea of being a true human or not being a true human is that, we're a true human when we're in interrelationship or interdependence, interbeing with everyone else. And when we separate ourselves off, we cut ourselves off from the source of our humanity, which is our connection to ourselves and connection to others. And so if we have a view of enemyship, we're being partial humans, or we're hampering our own humanity some way.
I think that's really nicely said.
I feel like Jeremy, you've laid the foundation now for your book, because your book really is a response to what you just talked about. And so I'm wondering if you might just, in a general way, talk about sort of your motivation or what led you to write, because it feels like what we just talked about really lends itself to the book itself.
Yeah. So, I mean, there were kind of two inspirations to the book. Probably many more than that. I mean, two that come to mind right now. One of them is, being a teacher at a university. I teach at Penn State University, and I teach a lot of classes related to democracy. And as a land grant university, really one of the goals of land grant universities was, and to me remains, to prepare students to be citizens, to develop some of the capacities and skills that we need in order to have a functioning democracy. And so I found that in helping my students to build these skills, to become civic leaders, to become good teammates, to become participants, responsible participants in our culture, that mindfulness was just essential to all of it. That anytime we were going to talk about a controversial issue or look at something really deeply, actually building in some practices of mindfulness helped to build our capacity to do that. So that's one of the inspirations behind the book. And behind what is, I'm recognizing the more I talk to people, for some people, it's kind of an odd pairing, mindfulness and democracy. Why do these two things go together? One is not like the other. Well, I think that they do. And I actually think it's necessary and essential. The other inspiration for the book was the fact that this is the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And I wrote a big part of my dissertation about the Declaration of Independence. It's a text I've always been really interested in, and it's one of the most influential texts in human history. And there's this very, very, very proud tradition of rewriting the Declaration of Independence to serve various needs and moments. And so abolitionists were rewriting the Declaration of Independence in the 1830s and 40s. And women suffragettes were rewriting the Declaration of Independence in the 1910s and 1920s, and it was a really important text for civil rights activists and anti-war activists in the 60s and 70s, and it inspired the United Nations. And so I gave myself a challenge, a rhetorical challenge. I thought it'd be interesting to rewrite the Declaration of Independence for this moment. And the constraints I set myself, I had to keep the same word count as the original. I had to keep the same structure as the original. There's 5 parts. And I wanted to keep some of the really interesting turns of phrase, even if I changed them a little bit. I realized that, the Declaration of Independence is an inspirational document in many ways. When it talks about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it meant that for a very narrow group of people. One that has gradually expanded throughout our history because of the work of activists. And so that's a part of our history that I'm really proud of, the way that that's expanded. But it's a document of enemyship, the original. It's a declaration of war. And so the key part of that original text is 27 grievances against the king. All the terrible things that the king have done, and the reason that he's an enemy, the reason he's evil, the reason we can't communicate with him, the reason we need to have a war. And given the proliferation of enemyship and democracy as a war today, the last thing I wanted to do was write 27 grievances. And so instead, I offer 27 insights into mindful democracy, like 27 prompts to practice, really, in the book. And the first part of the book is about developing a practice of mindfulness that helps us to embody interdependence, interconnection, interbeing. So that connection that's essential to being a true human being. The second part of the book is about building community, because that's really where we gain the capacity to care for each other, to care for ourselves, but also to begin to care for the world that we share. And then the third part of the book is about action. What are some concrete steps we can do in order to practice democracy, embody democracy, but also what are some things we should keep in mind as we're doing that? So those are really kind of the 2 lines of inspiration for the book.
Thank you. One of the things that you write about, and I've also heard you talk about, is reading the Declaration out loud.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like, would you be willing to read, I know on page 11 and 12, I think it would feels kind of right for you just to read the Declaration of Interdependence to Mend a Fractured World. And then I know you have the 27 insights. I'm going to ask you something impossible, but maybe after reading the Declaration, I think you've already summarized, but just kind of summarize too some of those. And then Dave, I know you will have a lot of questions. So
Sure.
love to hear it out loud.
Sure. How about I read the first 2 paragraphs?
Sure.
We did a performance of this week here in State College. It was really fun. But it takes, I don't know, 18 minutes or so to read the whole thing. And so, but the first 2 paragraphs are probably going to end up being the most familiar to people, just with the phrasing. So I'll share that, and then and then I'm happy to share some of the insights that I think are particularly important. So, all right. A declaration of interdependence to mend a fractured world. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for the citizens of the world to take a stand and declare in a multitude of voices and all the world's tongues that enough is enough. No longer will we stand aside while careless people casually set the world on fire. No longer will we watch democracy be destroyed and the inherent dignity of millions be slandered. No longer will we tolerate cruel and unjust systems that put profits ahead of people and deny that life, every single life, is a miracle. Dignity requires that these citizens declare the causes which impel them to make this stand, despite the possibility that simply continuing to suffer these evils would be so much simpler. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all people are created equal and interdependent, that everyone, all races, genders, classes, sexual identities, religions, and nationalities, belongs and can be truly well and has something to contribute to the ensemble and deserves the opportunity to answer life's ultimate questions in their own words. That in this endeavor, life, liberty, and happiness are sacred, and that no one need waste away from want when there is abundance. We stand on the common ground of our existence, aware that the present moment is the only moment that exists, the only moment in which change is possible. Friendship, not enemyship, is our foundation. Affirmation, not destruction, is our politics. Love, not hate, is our motivation. We act not for light and transient causes, but for the eternal aim, that we might be truly whole, safe, and at peace in this life together. So that's the first couple paragraphs.
Thank you so much. I love that idea of shifting from independence to interdependence. And I thought about this, like there's a concept, there's a concept that we're all connected. And I wonder how much the idea of interbeing, let's step back a minute though, to interbeing and beloved community. So you mentioned those two as kind of the some of the foundations. And I wondered how much you were influenced by this book, also on Parallax Press, about the beloved community and the relationship between Thich Nhat Hanh and Martin Luther King Jr., which I didn't know about until I came across this book, which was great. But can you say a little bit about, what is this idea of interbeing? How much is it a concept versus an experience? And then, what's the idea of beloved community and how does that follow from interbeing?
Yeah. So the book that you held up, Mark's book, is just fantastic. It's called Brothers in the Beloved Community. He's someone who I admire tremendously, and we're working on putting together an event together in the fall, actually, because we have a lot in common, it seems like, my work is deeply and profoundly inspired by the Zen Buddhist Thich Nhat Hanh. And Thich Nhat Hanh was born in the middle part of Vietnam in 1926, because this year is the 100th anniversary. He passed away 4 years ago, but this would have been his 100th birthday, or continuation day, as Buddhists like to say. And he was a revolutionary figure in Vietnam for many reasons, but one of the ideas that he developed that's been so transformative is this idea of engaged Buddhism. So he believed that acting in the world to relieve the suffering of the world and to relieve the suffering of others could be a valid path towards enlightenment, because to act to alleviate the suffering of others opens up the possibility for seeing things as they truly are, seeing how deeply interconnected we are as human beings. During the 1960s, he started the School for Youth and Social Services, which was basically this school in central Vietnam where young people could come and learn some skills of practicing mindfulness and engaged Buddhism to help with efforts to resettle people and to provide people with food and shelter and safety during the Vietnam War. And there are stories of Thich Nhat Hanh walking around with his students, like as bombs are falling around them, practicing mindfulness, practicing mindful breathing. And he talks about how they needed that. They needed that to be able to keep their heads while the situation was just so awful around them. In 1965, he wrote a letter to Martin Luther King, and it's an amazing letter. Mark talks about it in the Brothers in the Beloved Community book, which again I can't speak highly enough about. It's a fantastic book. Everyone should read it. And Thich Nhat Hanh and Martin Luther King became friends, and they met twice in person. King ended up nominating Thich Nhat Hanh for the Nobel Peace Prize in 1967, though an award wasn't given that year. An award wasn't given that year, we suspect, because King made his nomination letter public, and traditionally they were private and confidential. But King used his letter to call out the injustice of the Vietnam War. And so no award was given that year. Thich Nhat Hanh didn't win. But that's about the time that Thich Nhat Hanh found out that he was exiled from Vietnam. And he was exiled because he refused to play the game of enemyship. He refused to take a side. And so the North Vietnamese said he was a CIA agent working for the Americans. The Americans in the South Vietnamese said he was a communist agent working for China. And so he ended up not having a lot of friends in the government, though he was beloved there. And so he's exiled. He ends up settling in Paris, at least initially, because there was a large expat Vietnamese community there. And then in the 1980s, they moved south and established the Plum Village Monastery there. And so one of the things that Martin Luther King inherited from civil rights and peace activists was this idea of the beloved community. And it's an idea of building a community that practices love. Love not just for the people who are present, but love for everyone. A community that practices inclusion. A community that practices true democracy. And the beloved community is special because it's in the beloved community that we embody the world that we want to create. So we practice the kind of world that we want. The last time that Thich Nhat Hanh and Martin Luther King met, it was in Geneva, Switzerland. Martin Luther King passed the idea of the beloved community on to Thich Nhat Hanh and asked him to continue that work. And so one of Thich Nhat Hanh's missions in life, not his only one, but one of them was to continue this work in building the beloved community. And in the Plum Village tradition, the beloved community is a network of smaller communities all around the world that are practicing mindfulness, that are practicing loving kindness, that are practicing loving speech and deep listening. But they're also spaces where people can learn about, experience, and then embody interbeing. So that word, as far as I know, is a word that Thich Nhat Hanh invented. And he tells stories about how he was in a meditation retreat in California in the late 1980s. He did a lot of retreats in the United States at that point. And he was giving this teaching on the nature of a table. And he said, when you look at a table, you see this thing, and it looks like a unified thing. But really, a table is made of wood. A table is made of nails or glue. A table is made of the efforts of a carpenter. The blueprints that come with this. It's made from trees, and trees are made from sunlight and from rain, and from the earth. And so all of these elements come together to make up this thing we call a table. But if you return the nails, the metal to the earth, the table would not exist. If you return the wood to the trees, the table would not exist. If you return the carpenter to his parents, or her parents, the table would not exist. And so Thich Nhat Hanh tried several words out, and interbeing became the one that he liked the best. And he said that that word means this is because that is. Human beings are like that too. This is that interconnectedness, interdependence that we were talking about earlier. And so I love beloved community. I love practicing building beloved community and seeing the moment in which people move from recognizing that a table is all of these different things that come together to realizing that a human being, ourselves, are exactly the same way. I mean, in a very cosmic, metaphorical sense, but also a very true and real sense. It took 4.5 billion years to wake up this morning. I mean, that's amazing when you think of us being so deeply interconnected on a biological level, right? I mean, breathing the same air when we inhabit the same space. When the rain falls, it falls on all of us equally. So I think that one of the things that I hope that people get out of the book, is that it's not enough to understand interbeing or interdependence just on an intellectual level. I mean, I don't think it's particularly hard to understand it on an intellectual level, though we're habituated to looking at the world very differently, right? I mean, like, human beings are like billiard balls bouncing into each other. That's kind of how we tend to think of it. Or, we strive for self-reliance in the sense of like pulling ourselves out of all of these connections, but we never can, of course. I mean, the connections remain. So I don't think it's real hard to understand it on an intellectual level, but to embody it, to feel it in your bones, in your breath, that changes things. I think that it helps our hearts to open. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Jeremy, one of
let
the,
me
oh,
just
go
do a
ahead.
follow-up, Chris, and then I'll hand it off to you. Um, Joseph Rael, Beautiful Painted Arrow, has a great kind of story or insight into the Pueblo culture that helped me understand interbeing too. He said that when elders would die, they'd take their bodies down and wash them in the river, and then their essence or soul would go from the river to the ocean. The sun would heat up the ocean. The essence of the elders would be lifted up into the rain or clouds. The clouds would come over, and when it rained, they would say the elders are blessing us. And
Oh,
then that would go into the food that was grown, and then they would be eating the blessing of the elders. So there was this real circularity. And I've really thought that's beautiful. And, Chris and I like so many different things about your book. I've written a lot about burnout and used the idea of interbeing as sort of a resource for burnout when you realize that there's no separation between you and the patient or you and the client. It sort of fortifies you in a way. Energy's not just going one way. Energy's kind of coming through you as well as going out of you. And I've also written about spiritual democracy. And I wondered about whether you were also influenced by Stephen Herman's book on spiritual democracy.
I actually don't know that book.
No?
Oh, but
Oh,
I'm excited.
yeah, and this one too. Because you mentioned Whitman, so I thought maybe, he talks about Whitman and spiritual
Cool.
democracy. Yeah, so those are really great. I've got a chapter on spiritual democracy in the book with Joseph Rael of Becoming Medicine.
Cool.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, I'll hand it over to you, Chris. I just want to make a couple of those points.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I feel we could go to spiritual democracy, but maybe I just want to come back a little bit to interbeing and interdependence. One of the phrases, as I read your book, Jeremy, that became a mantra for me is that you would say working together to care for each other and for the life that we share. And I wonder if that was just another expression, another way of wording kind of what we're talking about with interbeing and interdependence.
Yeah, it was, I don't know, fairly late in the writing process where I don't even remember who was reading the document. But someone said to me, they said, your definition of democracy is really implicit, but can you make it explicit? Can you define what it is you mean by mindful democracy? And I spent several days meditating on that about the right way to frame it. And inspired by a number of different traditions, Thich Nhat Hanh's tradition, but also, a lot of my work is really deeply inspired by Walt Whitman. He's my favorite poet. I love Whitman. My last book was about Whitman and Emerson and the Bhagavad Gita. And so I define democracy as a communal practice, and so done together in community, and it's a practice. I think a lot of people, I see at least the way that people talk about democracy sometimes is like a thing out there that we need to save, so it's different than us, but it's not. Democracy is us in the way that we relate to each other. So it's a practice. So democracy is a communal practice of caring for ourselves, each other, and the life that we share or the world that we share. And I think that very much is an expression of interbeing or interdependence, like you said. Yeah.
Another question that I had as I was reading the book that I was curious about is where do you see mindful democracy? Where is it already taking place or at root? And you mentioned Plum Village, but I'm just curious if you'd be willing to share that.
Yeah. I think that a lot of times in the attention economy we live in, right? Like our attention's constantly drawn to negativity, to things that are not working well, to things that are breaking down. Um, but there are a lot of things that are working well right now. And so I think that mindful democracy lives in a lot of places. I mean, I think it lives, I think in a lot of like practice communities, not all of them. Some of them are very hierarchical. But I know that there are schools around the country that are organized around democratic principles of governance and empowerment, where people are practicing, um, learning to talk and listen with mindfulness. I think that a lot of the protests that happened in Minneapolis, to me, really um, show the power of beloved community and mindful democracy. The ability to see that something is happening, as that's part of mindfulness, is to accept, yes, this is happening right now, because we're so good at deflecting, right? When something is happening and we don't really want to like pay attention to it. But yes, what is happening is happening. But we don't have to accept the justness of it, because what is happening is unjust. But if we respond through enemyship, we're just going to reify the situation. And so, a lot of my friends in Minneapolis were very deliberately practicing nonviolence. They were practicing love and compassion. And even as they were being really fierce in their opposition to injustice. And so I think you see it there as well, actually. I don't know. What do you all think?
Yeah, I wanted to get to this question because my sister and sister-in-law are both in Minneapolis, so
Oh,
we're
wow.
hearing a lot. My sister-in-law is a school teacher who's school is affected by what's going on. And my sister's a graphic designer and has been really connected to people for a long time there. Um, and I've wondered, from reading the book, almost like I know the process of publishing a book, you probably finished the book maybe 6 months ago or however long ago, and it's been through this process. But would there be anything different that you added now after Minneapolis, and what's happening there? And after it's, I was really worried in the first presidency that we were moving in a fascist direction. The words being used were fascist words. They were very much enemyship words. It's a very useful concept I didn't have. And now it seems like we're seeing enemyship in action. It's almost like your book in reverse. First, that they're creating that sense of the other, then they're demonizing and separating, and now we're seeing the action of what happens when you demonize and into us and them. So yeah, would you say anything different to address that for people in Minneapolis now?
I've got an article that I wrote that is applying a lot of the concepts from the book to what's happening in Minneapolis and other places. A lot of us have our eyes on Philadelphia as a potential place where some of this might happen. And uh, the norms in Philadelphia for civic engagement are different than the norms in Minneapolis in some ways. And so it'll be interesting to see how things play out. But I don't know that I would change anything really, because I feel like, someone asked me, I had the opportunity to have a book launch party here in State College just a couple days ago, and it was wonderful. There were 75 people who came out, and we had a really great conversation. And someone asked me just point blank, what do you say to the statement that you can't negotiate with a fascist? And thinking about that question, I wonder if there's a difference. There is, between saying you can't negotiate with a fascist and you can't negotiate with someone who has fascist beliefs. Because to say that someone is a fascist is making a claim about their essential nature as a being, as opposed to recognizing that our essential nature as beings are pretty much all the same. I mean, we feel, we suffer pain, we often don't know what to do with that pain. We lash out at things that actually aren't going to make any difference whatsoever and make us feel better, but it feels like maybe they will. I think that recognizing that people are not evil, but they're mistaken is really essential to democracy. So that's one of the lessons in the book. But also recognizing that hatred has no place in democracy is another lesson in the book. And that sometimes beloved communities have to draw lines. It's uncomfortable, and we should be very mindful and considerate in how we do that. But if someone really truly is embodying, the principles of fascism, perhaps they have to be excluded from the community because their desire or their goal is to perpetuate injustice. But I just think we have to be so much more careful and mindful and compassionate and loving in how we do that. And I think that we see it in places like Minneapolis. We see it in places it was happening in Portland and LA as well. There was violence for sure, but the majority of the interactions were really deeply loving. So yeah.
Jeremy, this reminds me, and I will answer your question that you asked, because I haven't forgot that.
Worries.
But this reminds me of your discussion of deliberations
Yeah.
that I thought was really, I really like that part of the book, and wondering if you would be willing to speak to that.
Sure. So I'm gonna find the chapter here, or the insight.
And while you're doing that, so for me, the response to your question and
Yeah.
it would be our neighborhood. This is one place where I feel that we have that. Dave offers a healing circle that we get together monthly. And then again, I'm also connected with the Zen Buddhist community. That for me is also a place where that can show up.
I have a very good friend who's an alcoholic, and his recovery communities we've talked about are beautiful examples of mindful democracy and beloved community. And um, John Dewey said that democracy is community life, and it lives on neighborhood street corners. And so I think that that's one place we do very much find this. Yeah. Yeah, in terms of deliberation, like I said earlier, I teach classes on you know, public controversy. I teach a class on propaganda. I teach a class on war and peace rhetoric and nonviolent activism. So a lot of times in classes, we will, be discussing really heavy, challenging topics. And pretty early on, they've evolved over the course of 10 or 12 years or so. I started developing some guidelines for deliberation in the classroom. And I guess rather than thinking of them as like guidelines, which are something that, like a teacher or an authority figure hands down and people have to abide by, I started thinking of them as agreements that we will agree to practice because it will help us to be better deliberators, to be better community members, to be better listeners. And so it's Insight 22 is about deliberation, and I articulate 5 agreements of mindful deliberation. And I'm hopeful that this is one of the parts of the book that people find useful when they're in community, when they're talking with each other about what do we do about fascism? What do we do about injustice? So the first agreement is we are all in this together. And I think what's important about this is to recognize that there are debates in the world, and that's great. I have friends who are amazing debaters. But a deliberation is different than a debate, because in a debate, there's a winner and a loser, usually. But in a deliberation, we all win or we all lose together. So we have to recognize that we're in this together, because ultimately we're trying to arrive at some decision or some solution that will benefit all of us. Speak up and listen up is the second agreement, and that's just saying that we should make space in deliberation for all voices, and do what we can to include the wisdom that everyone brings to the space. Stay on topic, which maybe sounds silly, but it's one of the easy ways that we get deflected and thrown off. And so we're going to choose a topic to talk about today, and we're going to talk about that topic. And I know that maybe you want to talk about something we were talking about 2 weeks ago, but we're not going to do that. And I found that to be really something that, people want to talk about stuff that happened a month ago or 6 months ago because they've been ruminating on it. And so let's actually have an occasion where we're going to do that, and we're going to talk about that topic. But today we're talking about this. So we're going to stay on the topic. That becomes a mindfulness practice, a practice of coming back to the present moment. And I often will invite someone who's participating in the discussion. I like to do this with my students. They really like it when I hand them my singing bowl, my little bell. They love to play the bell. But I invite them to, if it seems like the discussion is going off topic, I invite them to sound out the bell. And when the bell rings, everybody stops immediately and takes 3 deep breaths. Practice the 5 questions. These are questions that help to look at the discussion, the topic from different angles and perspectives that we might not otherwise look at. What are the pros of this position? What are the cons? What are the unknowns and the questions we're not equipped to answer at this point? What quality evidence do we have to support or oppose this position? And what do we do if we're wrong? And then the last agreement is it's okay to change your mind. And I found this one is really important. I don't know what you all have found in your, experience and in your practice, but I'm really struck often by my students, and they'll be unwilling to participate in a discussion because they don't want to be wrong. They don't want the people around them to think that they're wrong, or maybe that they're not smart. And so I try to invite everyone to recognize that we're all learning together. We're all in this together. And that if you change your mind, it's okay. That's actually the sign of bravery, I think, often. So, yeah, so those are the deliberation guidelines or agreements.
I really appreciate that. Thank you. I've been doing some other reading, and the other question that came up for me that has been helpful is whose voice is not being heard?
That's a good one. Yeah, yeah, that's a very good one. Writing
Dave,
it.
Dave, I'm going to hand it to you.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Let's go back. I think you really dig Herman's stuff on spiritual democracy, and he's written so much about Whitman in both these books too. And I saw that you drew on Whitman a lot too. But I'll read you how he defines spiritual democracy. I think there's a lot of overlap with mindful democracy. He says, adopting the big idea of spiritual democracy, the realization of the oneness of humanity with the universe and all its forces, can help people feel joy, peace, and interconnectedness on an individual basis. It can also inspire us to undertake sacred activism, the channeling of such forces into callings that are compassionating, just, and equitable heart and conscience. And of equitable heart and conscience, and give us some tools to start solving some of these grave global problems while uniting the people of the planet.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's a really, really nice book. So spiritual democracy. We've got a tradition starting today with you of putting reading resources at the end of our
Oh,
podcast when we're putting it out there. So give us some different reading resources, and I'd really like to know, is there a way that people can get your other books? I was trying to find some of them and couldn't find them.
yeah. Ooh, other reading resources. That's great. Well, we have two Herman books
Mm-hmm.
on spiritual democracy. We have Mark Andrews' book, Brothers in
Mm-hmm.
the Beloved Community, which is great. I think that my last book was called The Ethics of Oneness, Emerson, Whitman, and the Bhagavad Gita, published by the University of Chicago Press. And so it's available. I'm sure, I mean, libraries probably have it. I know you can get it on Amazon, but I also know a lot of people aren't exactly thrilled about buying books on Amazon right now, which I can respect for sure. And um, uh, Thich Nhat Hanh has a really great book. I mean, he has many. He wrote like 100 books. He was prolific, but he has a really great book called Good Citizens. And it's him outlining engaged Buddhism. And it's a beautiful book. I teach it often with my students. And yeah, I don't know. I was gonna see what else I cite at the end of the book. I don't know. What would you all add to a list of reading resources?
Oh, I see bookshop.org has your books.
Oh, great. Well, then
Yeah.
that's
Mm-hmm. Yep.
perfect. Yeah.
Yep. So good. I just must not look deeply enough. Another one I was thinking was Parker J. Palmer.
Of
Healing the
course,
Heart of
that's a
Democracy
great book.
is a
Yes,
really, it's a little older. Well, some of these are kind of older too, but they still really apply to the present moment.
absolutely.
Yeah,
That's a great book. I like that book a lot.
yeah, yeah. Send us some, if you have other ideas, send them to us and we'll put a list at the end. Um, Chris, anything you wanted to add? You had some sort of Quaker angle you wanted to bring in possibly too.
Well,
Speaking of Palmer.
I was just again doing some prep for our time together, and I was just noting here you were, in fact, some of my relatives many years ago are from your area and were Quakers. And I was just thinking there's quite a tradition, isn't there, of Quaker in terms of a mindful democracy and in terms of pausing and in terms of deliberation. So that was just rattling around in my mind and wondered if that had influenced you in any way with the book.
I when I first moved to the area, I went to some quicker meetings, and there's a am I echoing a little bit? Huh, interesting. Well, at any rate, I the Quaker community here is just fantastic. One of the best elementary schools in town is a Quaker school, and a lot of friends and neighbors have sent their kids there. And I end up learning a lot actually from the kids, talking about some of the principles that they have. And but their sense of governing by consensus is amazing when you see it happen in practice, because it means that decisions are made slowly, but also really mindfully, because people have, they listen, and so I think that is a really cool part of the inheritance of this particular place and this particular state, and I was also struck on Wednesday when I was talking about my book at our book launch party. I have friends who are part of the Unitarian Universalist Church here. And of course, that's the tradition of transcendentalism with Emerson and others. And my friends said, listening to me talk, they said, well, you're talking about that. It's you. And so I think it's wonderful how many pathways there are to interbeing or to interdependence. And there's a wealth of resources and traditions of practice we can draw upon when thinking about mindful democracy and learning how to embody it. So I find that really, really hopeful, actually.
Jeremy, I have to ask you this question too. So forgive me for this one, but your title is called On Mindful Democracy. And I thought, well, why didn't he just call it Mindful Democracy? So I'm curious about the word on.
Sure. Um, I wish I had a good answer to that other than the fact that it's what the publisher wanted. And I realize how little control actually authors often have over titles of books. And so we had conversations about that. And they said that books that are called On are really popular right now. But part of the reason I got on board and that I liked it is that, it might not be obvious from the book at all, but the format of the book was deeply inspired by Timothy Snyder's little book on tyranny, and that's a practical user's guide, very short chapters built around insights that are practiced during times of fascism or tyranny, and so that's part of why I liked that on. But it could have just as easily been called Mindful Democracy. At one point, I wanted to call it a Declaration of Interdependence as being the title. But yeah, like I said, this was what the publisher wanted, and they know better than me, I think. So
It's a great answer. Um, Yeah, it's interesting to look at your book and on tyranny as almost these flip sides of like a yin and yang type of thing, or some of Jason Stanley's work too, which you probably read as well. Those have been really influential to me in trying to understand the present moment. But I
Mhm.
really like this idea of, like Nietzsche said, if you stare into the abyss too long, you risk, or you face what is something about monsters and abyss. If you stare into fight monsters too long, you risk becoming them, and if you stare back in the abyss will stare back into you. So, we need this positive and hopeful side, as well as understanding how and why are things happening, to understand how we can make things better again.
Yeah. And so the book ends with a conclusion on hope. And, people ask me about that. I had the chance to, I love Cornel West's work. I had the chance to talk with him a little bit while I was working on the book. And, his vision of democracy has a healthy amount of the blues in it, because there are the blues, when just human existence, that's part of it. But he talks about hope on a tightrope is one of his phrases, and I like that phrase a lot, actually. Of like, hope it's a practice, it's a balancing act. But without hope, I don't know how we continue to go on. And I think the grounds for hope are there in the practice themselves, because all of us have the capability, the capacity to pause, to slow down, to notice enemyship, to notice these really destructive emotions as they arise in us, to recognize them, and then to respond to life in a different way. And so I don't feel like hope is far off for me, but it is something we have to practice.
I like that idea of hope as a practice. I often go back to Václav Havel's long quote on hope.
Of
And Chris
course.
is writing a book on hope. How's that Hope Opens Doors book
Oh,
coming along, Chris?
Yeah, thanks. You reminded me. Dave may know this story, Jeremy, but so I'm writing a book called Hope Opens Doors, and
well, that's
um,
beautiful.
it came out of a dream. I was asleep, and my wife got up and she opened the door, and the door, when you open it, wood against wood kind of has this sound. And at that exact moment in my dream, somebody said, "Hope opens doors."
Hmm.
And so I started following the breadcrumbs and wrote a book about it that hopefully will publish soon. But one of the things he reminded me is, so we watch two of our grandchildren 3 times a week. And the oldest one, Angelo, and I were out for a walk one day, and he saw this rabbit. And so he says, I got to follow this rabbit. So we're going through our neighborhood, and I'm seeing parts of the neighborhood I haven't seen in,
Hmm.
since living here for, 20 some years. And we never did catch the rabbit. And so I was reflecting on that, you know, afterwards, and I was saying, well, we didn't catch the rabbit, we didn't do it, but the rabbit still exists. This idea that wanting to kind of explore still exists, and I thought, well, that's kind of true again for health. Is like may not have health, but it still exists, and we may not have hope that we want today, but hope does exist. And so it was this, to me, kind of this great moment of really seeing how hope does exist. Maybe not in the way that we feel it or experience it in the present moment, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't exist. And so my grandson helped me to see that.
That's a beautiful teaching. I can't wait to see that book.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks.
Uh,
Well, do you think we're ready to begin to wind down a little bit? It kind of
Yeah,
feels that way here.
we got the question, our new tradition,
Yes, yes.
starting. Actually, you're the second person that we're
Second
doing
person.
this with, right? We're just starting to do interviews, actually. So we used to just be the Chris and Dave show, but now we got tired of hearing each other's, shtick. So, so we're bringing in some new blood. So, is there anything that you really were hoping when you came into the podcast today? Anything you were really hoping to be able to talk about that we didn't get to?
That's a great question. And I don't think so, actually. I mean, I think it's just really exciting to see what questions folks have about the book. And you all are both fantastic viewers, so you ask the questions that are most exciting to me with the book. So, yeah.
I do have one request, which you can choose not to. You have this lovely poem of hope on page 155, and that might be a really wonderful way to bring this wonderful conversation to, at least for now, a close.
Yeah.
Ongoing.
I'd be happy to read it. It's, in central Pennsylvania, about this time of year, it's very gray. We're desperately wanting spring. Um, and it was a year ago that I saw this happen, so I wrote a poem about that. So the poem is called Hope. Snow melts from a tree branch. Someday soon it will be a cloud, and rain will fall on new leaves. There is spring in winter, and winter in spring. Take heart.
Dave, you're muted.
I was just telling you I muted you because I noticed that the distortion coming through Jeremy was when your mic was on too. I was just experimenting with this new platform, so sorry to ruin the moment.
Not at all.
Do you want to read that again? It's so short.
Sure.
Let's read it again. I'll mute both of us here so that we can hear it clearly.
Sure. All right. So the poem is called Hope. Snow melts from a tree branch. Someday soon it will be a cloud, and rain will fall on new leaves. There is spring in winter, and winter in spring. Take heart.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I wonder if you'd be willing to come back again sometime this year if Chris and I read one of your other books. And I don't know, what do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I think you have a book to be published at some point in the. So you've been busy, Jeremy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I that would be great. I have another book coming out. We got that echo. There we go. I have another book coming out later this year called Living Namaste, Practical Guide to Yoga, Mindfulness, and Building Community. And it's funny that that book is coming after because actually that book was finished about a year ago, and the publication process has just been really long for that one. So it was finished before this book, even I started, and that's a book that's inspired by teaching yoga and my scholarship on the history of yoga, and thinking about that ritual of saying namaste at the end of yoga practice, and how that can become actually a ritual of building interbeing and interdependence and community. And I would love to come back and talk about that if you all would like. That's going to be out in June, I think. So middle of June.
Great. Yeah, we'll look forward to that. I was also thinking we might need something to bring in a word like mystical democracy, of like the experience of oneness, of how do you cultivate that. I like the idea of interbeing, and spiritual democracy, mindful democracy, all these different ways that we can think of an experience of democracy, or like the inner practice of democracy.
Yeah, Whitman talks about the experience of he was an amazing poet, and so he had lots of language. But he talks about the experience, the embodied experience of oneness as being the sine qua non, the true essence of democracy. And I like the phrase mystical democracy, spiritual democracy. I feel like we should get a bunch of people together and have a little event and conversation about varieties of democracy. That would be really fun. In the spirit of William James and his varieties of religious experience, we could think about varieties of
Yep.
democratic
I
experience.
like that. I love that. Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful.
Jeremy, one of the things that we would like to ask you is how might people reach out to you? I know you started a Substack, but just again, ways that our listeners can continue reading and following your work.
Yeah, I think that probably the best way is I've started a Substack called Zen and the Art of Democracy, and I'm gonna be publishing. I don't know. I have a whole nother book's worth of material that was written for this book that didn't go into this book. And other things, interviews and whatnot, and also sharing some of the things that I've written for other publications online. And it seems like Substack is a nice platform for that. So I'm going to try to spend some energy and time. I'd love to connect to people there. My website is just my name, jeremydavidengels.com, and I have an email list there, and I'm mostly going to use that for sending out announcements about events and retreats and things like that. So those are both really nice ways to connect.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. If you want to stay on for a minute, Jeremy, we'll kind of debrief here.